1 year after the first kidnapping attempt, Morrison stood in the Cabinet Office briefing room, addressing a gathering of security officials from across the Commonwealth. The Royal Protection Review Unit had become a model for other nations facing similar infiltration threats, and Morrison had been asked to share the lessons learned from protecting the British royal family. "The most important thing we've discovered," Morrison explained to the assembled delegates, "is that the greatest threats often come from individuals who appear to be the most trustworthy. Traditional background checks and surveillance methods are insufficient when dealing with professionally trained intelligence operatives who spend years building authentic cover identities." In the audience, Commander Hughes watched with pride as Morrison outlined the innovative approaches that had revolutionized royal protection. The unit's success rate in identifying and neutralizing threats had been extraordinary, with over 30 potential infiltrators detected and removed from positions where they could have posed risks to the royal family or other government officials. After the presentation, Morrison returned to his office to find a message waiting from Kensington Palace. Princess Charlotte had specifically requested his presence for what she described as an important security consultation. Over the past year, these consultations had become a regular occurrence, with Charlotte's observations leading to several significant security improvements. Morrison arrived at the palace to find Charlotte in the music room, practicing piano with her instructor. When she saw him enter, she immediately stopped playing and approached with the serious expression that had become familiar when she had security concerns to discuss. "Morrison, I need to tell you about something that happened at the charity event last weekend," Charlotte began without preamble. "There was a photographer there who was taking pictures, but he wasn't like the other photographers." Morrison sat down and pulled out his notebook. "What made him different, Princess?" Charlotte's 9-year-old mind had developed remarkable clarity in describing security concerns. All the other photographers were taking pictures of everyone at the event, the decorations, the speeches, the food. But this man only took pictures when our family was in the frame. And he kept moving to get better angles of us, especially when we were talking to important people. Morrison's attention sharpened. Surveillance photography at public events was a common intelligence gathering technique, but most professional photographers would naturally focus on the royal family. "Did you notice anything else about his behavior?" "He had a different camera than everyone else. The other photographers had big cameras with long lenses, but his camera was smaller and quieter. And he wasn't wearing a press badge like the others." Morrison made detailed notes. Charlotte's observational skills had improved dramatically over the past year, and her ability to identify anomalous behavior had proven invaluable. "Did you see him interact with anyone else at the event?" Charlotte nodded emphatically. "That's the strangest part. During the dinner, I saw him talking to one of the waiters. They were standing in a corner where they thought no one could see them, but I could see them from my seat. The waiter gave him something small that he put in his pocket." Morrison felt the familiar chill of recognition. The scenario Charlotte described suggested coordinated intelligence gathering, with a photographer working in conjunction with someone who had legitimate access to the event. "Can you describe either of them in more detail?" The photographer was medium height with dark hair, and he had a small scar on his left hand. The waiter was younger, maybe in his 20s, with blonde hair. "But, Morrison, there's something else." After they talked, the waiter kept watching our table during dinner. Not in a normal serving way, but like he was studying us. Morrison closed his notebook and stood up. "Princess, you've done excellent work once again. I need to investigate this immediately. Do you remember which catering company was used for the event?" Charlotte smiled with satisfaction. "I asked Mama about that yesterday. It was Prestige Events Catering. I wrote down the name because I thought you might want to know." Morrison was continually amazed by Charlotte's developing security consciousness. The 9-year-old princess had learned to automatically gather information that would be useful for investigation purposes. "You're becoming quite the detective, Princess." Within hours, Morrison's team had begun a comprehensive investigation of Prestige Events Catering and cross-referenced the employee roster with the guest photographer list from the charity event. The results confirmed Charlotte's instincts in a disturbing way. Detective Sergeant Parker presented the findings to Morrison's team that evening. The waiter Charlotte described matches the description of Thomas Brennan, a temporary employee hired specifically for that event. Brennan's background check showed some irregularities that weren't caught during the initial screening process. Morrison reviewed Brennan's file with growing concern. What kind of irregularities? His employment history shows a gap of 18 months that he claims was spent caring for a sick relative abroad. However, we can't verify the relative's existence or Brennan's presence in the claimed location during that period. Detective Inspector Foster, who had become Charlotte's primary protection officer, added her analysis. The photographer has been more difficult to identify. He wasn't on the official press list, and none of the legitimate photographers remember seeing someone matching his description. Morrison studied the event photographs that had been taken by official photographers, looking for any images that might show the suspicious individual Charlotte had described. Have we reviewed all the security footage from the event? We're working through it now, Parker replied. The venue had limited coverage, but we should have a complete analysis by tomorrow morning. Morrison made a decision that had become standard procedure when Charlotte identified potential threats. I want full background investigations on every employee who had access to the royal family during that event. Cross-reference with known intelligence operatives and look for any patterns that might indicate coordinated surveillance. The investigation revealed a sophisticated intelligence operation that had been operating for several months. Thomas Brennan was discovered to be a false identity, with the real name being Anton Petrov, a Russian intelligence operative who specialized in long-term infiltration of high-security events. More disturbing was the discovery that Petrov had worked at least 6 different events attended by royal family members over the past 4 months, each time using different catering companies and false identities. The intelligence gathered from these events would have provided detailed information about royal family security procedures, personal preferences, and behavioral patterns. This represents a significant escalation in surveillance operations, Morrison reported to Commander Hughes during an emergency briefing. They're no longer relying on single deep-cover operatives, but instead using multiple short-term infiltrations to build comprehensive intelligence pictures. The photographer was eventually identified through facial recognition analysis as Dmitry Kozlov, brother of Sarah Kozlov, the woman who had attempted to kidnap Charlotte a year earlier. The family connection suggested that the original conspiracy had not been dismantled as completely as initially believed. Morrison, this changes our threat assessment significantly, Commander Hughes observed. We're dealing with a persistent network that's willing to adapt their methods and continue operations despite previous failures. Morrison nodded grimly. The fact that they're using Kozlov's brother suggests personal motivation as well as professional objectives. They may be seeking revenge for the failure of the original operation. The investigation led to a coordinated international effort to identify and neutralize the broader network. Working with intelligence agencies across Europe and North America, Morrison's team helped identify over 40 individuals connected to the organization responsible for targeting the British royal family. Several arrests were made simultaneously across multiple countries, effectively dismantling what intelligence officials described as one of the most sophisticated long-term infiltration operations ever detected. The operation's scope had extended far beyond the royal family, with evidence of surveillance targeting government officials, military personnel, and business leaders. As the immediate threat was neutralized, Morrison reflected on the crucial role that Princess Charlotte had played in protecting not just her own family, but potentially hundreds of other targets. Her natural observational skills and willingness to report suspicious behavior had prevented what could have been a catastrophic intelligence breach. Morrison met with Charlotte one final time before the investigation concluded. He found her in the palace garden, reading a book about detective stories. When she saw him approaching, she looked up with the bright smile that had endeared her to everyone who worked with the royal family. "Did you catch the fake waiter and the photographer?" Charlotte asked directly. Morrison sat down on the garden bench beside her. "Yes, Princess. They've been arrested, along with many other people who were working with them. Your observations helped protect many people beyond just your family." Charlotte's expression grew thoughtful. "I'm glad they were caught, but I'm also sad that people spend so much time trying to hurt others instead of doing good things." Morrison was struck by Charlotte's mature perspective on the situation. Despite her young age and the unusual circumstances of her life, she had maintained both innocence and wisdom. "You're right to be sad about that, Princess. But you should also be proud that you're helping to stop them." Charlotte closed her book and looked directly at Morrison. "Do you think I'll always have to watch for bad people?" Morrison considered his response carefully. "Princess, I think you'll always be naturally good at noticing when something isn't right. That's a gift that will serve you well throughout your life. But, hopefully, as you grow up, you won't have to worry about these kinds of dangers." Charlotte nodded solemnly before her expression brightened. "Morrison, I've been thinking about something. When I grow up, maybe I could work with your unit. I could help protect other people the way you've protected me." Morrison smiled at the thought of Princess Charlotte as a future security professional. "That would be quite a career change for a future queen, Princess. But your instincts and courage would certainly make you an excellent protector." As Morrison prepared to leave, Charlotte stood up and gave him a formal handshake. "Thank you for always believing me, Morrison. And thank you for teaching me that it's important to speak up when something doesn't feel right." Morrison returned the handshake with equal formality. "Thank you for trusting me enough to share your concerns, Princess. Your bravery has made a difference in many people's lives." As Morrison walked back to his vehicle, he reflected on the extraordinary relationship that had developed between a career protection officer and a young princess. Charlotte's initial cry for help had not only saved her from immediate danger but had led to the creation of an entirely new approach to royal security. The Royal Protection Review Unit had become a permanent fixture in British security operations, with similar units being established by allied nations. Morrison's team continued to adapt and evolve their methods, always staying one step ahead of those who would threaten the safety of the people they were sworn to protect. But, perhaps most importantly, Princess Charlotte had learned that her voice mattered, that her observations had value, and that courage could make a difference even in the most dangerous situations. As she grew older, these lessons would serve her well in the unique challenges that lay ahead for a future queen. Morrison knew that his work would continue, with new threats emerging and new challenges to overcome. But he also knew that he had helped create something more valuable than any security system. He had helped develop the character and courage of a young woman who would one day lead a nation. The story that had begun with a desperate plea for help had evolved into a testament to the power of trust, intuition, and the unbreakable bond between those who protect and those who depend on that protection. Princess Charlotte was safe, the threats had been neutralized, and the future of the British royal family was more secure than ever before. 6 months after the kidnapping attempt, Morrison stood in the newly constructed operations center of the Royal Protection Review Unit, watching his team of 12 hand-picked specialists analyze intelligence reports from around the world. The facility, located in a secure wing of Scotland Yard, represented a revolutionary approach to royal security that had been born from the lessons learned during Princess Charlotte's crisis. Detective Sergeant Emily Parker, Morrison's second-in-command, approached with a tablet containing the latest threat assessment report. "Morrison, we've identified 3 more potential infiltration attempts across different government departments. The pattern matches what we saw with the Kozlov network." Morrison reviewed the information with practiced efficiency. Since taking command of the unit, he had overseen the identification of 17 foreign agents operating within British government institutions. The scope of the infiltration attempts had been staggering, confirming that Charlotte's kidnapping had been part of a much larger intelligence operation. "What's the confidence level on these identifications?" Morrison asked, scrolling through the detailed profiles. "High on 2 of them, moderate on the 3rd. We've been monitoring communications patterns for 8 weeks, and the behavioral indicators are consistent with long-term placement operations," Parker replied. "MI5 wants to move on arrests within the next 72 hours. Morrison nodded. The close cooperation between his unit and the intelligence services had proven invaluable in identifying and neutralizing threats before they could materialize. "Schedule a briefing with Commander Hughes for this afternoon. We'll need royal family input on timing, especially if any of these individuals had potential access to royal schedules or facilities." The success of Morrison's unit had exceeded all expectations. By focusing on behavioral analysis and pattern recognition rather than just background checks and surveillance technology, they had identified security vulnerabilities that had existed for years without detection. The key insight had been recognizing that the most dangerous threats often came from individuals who appeared to be perfect employees. Morrison's secure phone buzzed with an incoming call from Kensington Palace. "Morrison here." "Sergeant Morrison, this is Private Secretary Williams. Princess Charlotte has specifically requested to speak with you about tomorrow's school visit. She says it's important for her security review." Morrison smiled. Over the past 6 months, Charlotte had become an unofficial consultant to his security reviews. Her natural perceptiveness and ability to read people had proven remarkably accurate in identifying potential concerns. The 8-year-old princess had developed an intuitive understanding of security protocols and often asked insightful questions that helped improve their procedures. "I'll be there within the hour," Morrison replied. "Is everything else proceeding normally for tomorrow's event?" "Yes, but Princess Charlotte insisted that she needed to discuss something with you personally before the final security briefing." Morrison gathered his files and headed toward his vehicle. The drive to Kensington Palace had become routine, but he never lost sight of the responsibility he carried. The royal family's trust in him and his unit represented more than just professional recognition. It was a sacred duty that required constant vigilance and absolute integrity. Upon arriving at the palace, Morrison was escorted to the private sitting room where Charlotte was waiting with her new primary protection officer, Detective Inspector Amanda Foster. Foster was one of Morrison's personally selected officers, chosen for her exceptional observational skills and natural rapport with children. "Sergeant Morrison." Charlotte greeted him with the enthusiasm that had become familiar. "I need to tell you about something strange that happened at school yesterday." Morrison sat down across from Charlotte, pulling out his notebook. Over the months, he had learned that Charlotte's observations were always worth documenting. "What did you notice, Princess?" Charlotte's expression grew serious. "There's a new teacher at school, Miss Watson. She started 3 weeks ago, and she's been asking lots of questions about my schedule and my family. But yesterday, she asked me something really weird." Morrison's attention sharpened. "What kind of question?" "She wanted to know if my parents ever talked about important government meetings at home. She said she was writing an article for a magazine about how royal children learn about politics. But it felt wrong, like when the fake police lady was asking questions." Morrison exchanged a meaningful look with Detective Inspector Foster, who nodded to confirm she had already begun preliminary inquiries into the new teacher. Charlotte's instincts had been finely tuned by her previous experience, and Morrison had learned to take her concerns very seriously. "Did Miss Watson ask anything else?" Morrison continued. Charlotte nodded emphatically. "She wanted to know if I had any friends whose parents work for the government. And she asked if I knew about any special security arrangements for tomorrow's visit. She said she was trying to make sure the school was prepared properly." Morrison felt the familiar chill of recognition. The questions Charlotte described followed the same intelligence-gathering pattern they had identified in previous infiltration attempts. A teacher would have natural access to Charlotte and could easily justify asking questions about her family and activities. "Princess, you did exactly the right thing by telling me about this. From now on, I want you to let Detective Inspector Foster know immediately if anyone asks you unusual questions about your family or schedule." Charlotte nodded solemnly. "I will. But, Morrison, there's something else. Miss Watson has been taking pictures during class time. She says it's for a school newsletter, but she always makes sure to include me in the pictures, and she asks other children to move so I'm more visible." Morrison's concern deepened. Surveillance photography was a common preliminary step in kidnapping operations, used to identify security vulnerabilities and plan approach routes. "Has anyone else from your school contacted your parents about these pictures or mentioned them to palace staff?" "I don't think so. Miss Watson said the pictures were just for internal school use and wouldn't be published anywhere." Morrison stood up, his decision made. "Detective Inspector Foster, I need you to contact Commander Hughes immediately and request an emergency investigation into this teacher." Princess, I want you to stay close to your regular protection officers today, and we're going to review tomorrow's school visit plans. As Foster stepped away to make the necessary calls, Morrison sat back down with Charlotte. Princess, I know this is frustrating, but your ability to recognize when something doesn't feel right has been incredibly important for keeping your family safe. Charlotte's mature response surprised him once again. I don't like having to worry about these things, but I understand why it's important. If bad people want to hurt my family, then I need to help stop them. Morrison was struck by the resilience and wisdom that Charlotte displayed. Despite her young age, she had developed a sophisticated understanding of the security challenges facing her family while maintaining her natural curiosity and joy in learning. Within 2 hours, Morrison's unit had compiled a complete background investigation on Miss Watson. The results confirmed Charlotte's instincts in a disturbing way. The woman claiming to be a teacher named Jennifer Watson was actually Maria Volkov, associate of Sarah Kozlov who had been living under a false identity for 6 months. Morrison, this gets worse, Detective Sergeant Parker reported during an emergency briefing. Volkov has been systematically photographing and documenting the security arrangements at Princess Charlotte's school. We found detailed floor plans, guard positions, and scheduling information in her apartment. Commander Hughes reviewed the evidence with growing alarm. This suggests that the original conspiracy was larger than we initially realized. They had multiple infiltration points planned, with the school serving as a backup option. Morrison studied the surveillance photographs that Volkov had taken. Look at these angles. She wasn't just documenting Charlotte's presence, she was mapping potential extraction routes and identifying security blind spots. The discovery led to an immediate review of all recent personnel additions at institutions frequented by royal family members. Morrison's team worked through the night, cross-referencing employment records, background checks, and behavioral patterns to identify other potential threats. By morning, they had identified 2 additional suspicious individuals, a groundskeeper at a polo club frequented by Prince William, and a catering supervisor who had recently gained access to royal event planning. Both individuals showed the same pattern of excessive curiosity about security arrangements and family schedules. As Morrison coordinated the arrests with MI5 and local police, he reflected on how close they had come to another crisis. Without Charlotte's perceptive observations and willingness to report her concerns, Volkov might have remained in position to execute whatever plan she was developing. The school visit scheduled for that day was cancelled while security teams swept the facility and reviewed every aspect of the planned event. Morrison personally walked through the school with Charlotte's regular protection officers, identifying the vulnerabilities that Volkov had been documenting. The level of planning here is sophisticated, Detective Inspector Foster observed as they reviewed Volkov's surveillance materials. She identified 3 different potential ambush points and documented the response times of local police to the school. Morrison nodded grimly. This confirms that we're dealing with a professional organization with significant resources and long-term commitment. They're willing to place operatives for months or years to achieve their objectives. Later that evening, Morrison returned to Kensington Palace to brief Charlotte on the day's developments. He found her in the library, working on homework with her tutor. When she saw him approach, she looked up with the expectant expression that had become familiar. "Did you catch the fake teacher?" Charlotte asked directly. Morrison sat down beside her. "Yes, Princess. Miss Watson was arrested this afternoon, along with 2 other people who were working with her. Your school will be safe for your return next week." Charlotte smiled with satisfaction. "I knew she was fake. She didn't feel like a real teacher. Real teachers care about what we learn, but she only cared about our schedule and our families." Morrison marveled at Charlotte's intuitive understanding of human behavior. "You've become quite good at reading people, Princess. That's a valuable skill that will serve you well as you grow up." Charlotte's expression grew thoughtful. "Morrison, do you think there will always be people trying to hurt my family?" Morrison considered his response carefully. "There may always be people who want to cause harm, Princess. But there will also always be people working to keep you safe. The important thing is that you continue to trust your instincts and speak up when something doesn't feel right." Charlotte nodded solemnly before returning to her homework. As Morrison prepared to leave, she looked up one more time. "Morrison, thank you for believing me about Miss Watson. Some adults don't listen to children, but you always listen." Morrison smiled, realizing that Charlotte had identified the most crucial element of effective security: the willingness to take every potential threat seriously, regardless of its source. An 8-year-old princess had once again proven to be one of his most valuable intelligence assets. As he drove back to Scotland Yard, Morrison reflected on the ongoing battle to keep the royal family safe in an increasingly complex threat environment. The discovery of Volkov and her associates confirmed that his unit's work was more important than ever. The enemies they faced were patient, sophisticated, and willing to invest years in developing their operations. But they had underestimated the power of human intuition and the courage of a young princess who refused to be intimidated. Charlotte's willingness to trust her instincts and report her concerns had prevented what could have been another catastrophic security breach. Morrison's unit would continue to evolve and adapt to meet new threats, but the fundamental principle remained unchanged: the most advanced security technology in the world was only as effective as the people who operated it, and sometimes the most important intelligence came from the most unexpected sources. The secure briefing room at Scotland Yard had never felt more charged with tension. 3 days after the attempted kidnapping of Princess Charlotte, the investigation had uncovered a web of conspiracy that reached deeper into the royal protection system than anyone had imagined. Morrison sat across from Commander Hughes and Detective Chief Inspector Rebecca Thornton, the lead investigator on the case, as they reviewed the evidence that had emerged. "Morrison, what you're about to hear will likely shock you," Commander Hughes began, his voice grave. "The investigation into Sarah Mitchell and her associates has revealed a conspiracy that's been in development for over 18 months. Detective Chief Inspector Thornton opened a thick file folder and spread several photographs across the table. Mitchell, whose real name is Sarah Kozlov, is a former Russian intelligence operative who specialized in long-term infiltration operations. She's been living under the Collins identity for nearly 2 years, building a perfect cover story." Morrison studied the photographs, which showed a progression of Kozlov's transformation into the woman he had known as Detective Inspector Collins. The attention to detail was remarkable. Everything from her accent to her knowledge of British police procedures had been meticulously crafted. "How did she manage to replace the real Collins so seamlessly?" Morrison asked, though he suspected the answer would be disturbing. Thornton's expression darkened. The real Detective Inspector Sarah Collins was recruited into royal protection 18 months ago. During that time, Kozlov systematically studied Collins' life, relationships, and professional habits. She made contact with Collins under the guise of being a long-lost cousin, slowly building a relationship that gave her access to personal information and professional details. "But the background checks, the security clearances," Morrison protested. "All legitimate, because Kozlov was using Collins' actual credentials," Hughes explained. 3 days ago, Kozlov drugged Collins and assumed her identity for what was supposed to be the final phase of their operation. "Collins is alive, but she's been unconscious for the better part of a week." Morrison felt a chill as he realized how close they had come to disaster. What was the ultimate objective? Ransom? Thornton shook her head. "This goes far beyond money, Morrison. According to evidence found in Kozlov's safe house, the plan was to kidnap Princess Charlotte and use her as leverage to force the royal family to make specific political statements that would destabilize the British government." The implications were staggering. Morrison had prevented not just a kidnapping, but a potential constitutional crisis. Who else was involved? There had to be significant inside help for this level of planning. Hughes and Thornton exchanged a meaningful look before Thornton continued. "That's where things become even more troubling. We've identified at least 3 other individuals within the royal protection system who provided information to Kozlov's network." Morrison's blood ran cold. 3 others? Who? Detective Constable Marcus Wright, who had access to scheduling information. Administrative Assistant Helen Carey, who managed communication protocols. And Thornton paused, her discomfort obvious. Chief Inspector David Blackwood. Morrison's world tilted. Chief Inspector Blackwood had been his mentor, the man who had recruited him into royal protection and had guided his career for 8 years. The thought that Blackwood could be involved in a conspiracy against the royal family was almost incomprehensible. Blackwood's been feeding information to this network for over a year, Hughes explained. Financial records show regular payments to an account he thought was untraceable. The investigation suggests he was recruited through gambling debts and gradually compromised until he was completely under their control. Morrison struggled to process the betrayal. How many operations were compromised? How long has the royal family been at risk? We're still determining the full extent, Thornton replied. But, based on the intelligence we've recovered, this network had detailed information about the movements and security arrangements for all senior members of the royal family. Princess Charlotte was apparently chosen as their target because they believed her kidnapping would have the maximum emotional impact while presenting the lowest security risk. Morrison felt a surge of protective anger. The idea that anyone would target an 8-year-old girl for political purposes was reprehensible. What's being done to ensure this can't happen again? Commander Hughes leaned forward. Morrison, that's actually why we're having this conversation. Your actions 3 days ago have led to a complete overhaul of royal protection protocols. But, more than that, your instincts and quick thinking have identified you as someone we need in a leadership position. Morrison was taken aback. Sir, I'm not sure I understand. The Commissioner has authorized the formation of a new elite unit within Royal Protection, Hughes explained. This unit will be responsible for internal security review and threat assessment. It will operate independently from existing chains of command to prevent future infiltration. We want you to lead this unit. The offer was both an honor and a tremendous responsibility. Morrison realized that accepting would mean fundamentally changing his relationship with royal protection work. Instead of being focused on a single principle, he would be responsible for the security integrity of the entire system. What would this involve? Morrison asked. Thornton opened another file. The new unit would have authority to investigate any member of royal protection staff, review all security protocols, and implement changes as necessary. You'd be working directly with MI5 and have access to intelligence resources that are currently beyond the scope of regular protection officers. Morrison thought of Princess Charlotte and her brave actions during the crisis. The trust she had placed in him, and the responsibility he felt for her safety, extended to all members of the royal family. What about my current assignment? Princess Charlotte specifically requested that I remain as her protection officer. Hughes smiled for the first time since the meeting had begun. That's been considered. Part of your new role would involve training a hand-picked team of officers for high-value principal protection. You'd maintain your relationship with Princess Charlotte while overseeing the broader security picture. As Morrison considered the offer, Thornton provided additional details about the investigation. We've also uncovered evidence that this conspiracy extends beyond the Kozlov network. There are indications of other foreign intelligence services attempting to infiltrate British institutions, using similar long-term placement strategies. Morrison's mind raced with the implications. If foreign powers were systematically attempting to compromise British security through patient infiltration, the threat level was far higher than anyone had realized. How many other potential sleeper agents might be in place? That's exactly the type of question your new unit would be tasked with answering, Hughes replied. The old model of royal protection assumed that threats would come from outside the system. Recent events have proven that assumption to be dangerously naive. Morrison made his decision with the same clarity that had guided his actions 3 days earlier. I accept the position, but I have conditions. Go ahead, Hughes encouraged. First, I want to personally interview every member of Princess Charlotte's new protection detail. Second, I want complete autonomy in investigating any security concerns, regardless of rank or position. Third, I want regular direct access to Princess Charlotte to ensure her ongoing well-being. Thornton nodded approvingly. Those conditions are not only acceptable, they're exactly the kind of thinking we need in this position. As the meeting concluded, Morrison reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just 3 days. From a routine protection officer to the head of an elite security unit, all because he had trusted the silent plea for help from an 8-year-old princess. The next morning, Morrison returned to Kensington Palace for what would be his final day as Princess Charlotte's primary protection officer. He found her in the palace gardens, working on a drawing with her art teacher. When she saw him approaching, her face lit up with the smile that had endeared her to the British public. "Sergeant Morrison. Look what I drew." Charlotte held up a picture that depicted a police officer and a small girl standing together. Above them, she had written in careful letters, "My hero." Morrison knelt down to examine the drawing more closely. "This is beautiful, Princess. Is this supposed to be us?" Charlotte nodded enthusiastically. "Mrs. Henderson says I should draw pictures of important memories. You saving me is my most important memory ever." Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders once again. "Princess, I need to tell you something important. Starting next week, you'll have a new primary protection officer. But I'll still be nearby, and I'll still be working to keep you safe." Charlotte's expression grew serious, showing the maturity that often surprised adults who interacted with her. "Is it because of the bad lady who pretended to be a police officer?" Morrison was continually amazed by Charlotte's perceptiveness. "Yes, partly. There are some changes being made to make sure something like that never happens again. But I want you to know that you were very brave, and what you did helped protect not just yourself, but your whole family." Charlotte considered this for a moment before nodding solemnly. "Will you teach the new officers to listen when people need help, like you listened to me?" Morrison smiled, realizing that Charlotte had just articulated the core principle of his new position. "That's exactly what I'm going to do, Princess. That's exactly what I'm going to do." As Morrison prepared to begin his new role, he reflected on the lessons learned from the crisis. The most sophisticated security systems in the world were only as strong as the people who operated them. Technology, protocols, and procedures were important, but the human element remained paramount. The conspiracy that had nearly succeeded in kidnapping Princess Charlotte had been defeated not by advanced technology or complex procedures, but by Morrison's willingness to trust his instincts and prioritize human intuition over rigid protocol. Charlotte's courage in communicating her distress, despite threats against her family, had been equally crucial. Moving forward, Morrison knew that his new unit would need to balance the necessary security measures with the human judgment that had proven so vital. The challenge would be creating systems that were both sophisticated enough to detect modern threats and flexible enough to adapt when those threats evolved. The investigation continued to unfold, revealing additional layers of the conspiracy and leading to arrests across multiple countries. But, for Morrison, the most important outcome was that Princess Charlotte was safe and would remain so. The 8-year-old girl who had shown such courage in crisis would grow up knowing that when she needed help, someone was listening. Morrison's hands gripped the radio as he made the call that would change everything. "Driver, pull over at the next safe location. Emergency stop, Code 7 protocol." The driver, Constable Peter Walsh, had worked with Morrison for 3 years and trusted his judgment implicitly. Without question, Walsh began looking for a suitable location to halt the convoy. "Morrison, what's your status?" Colin's voice crackled through the communication system, and Morrison detected a note of anxiety that confirmed his suspicions. "We're maintaining schedule for the art lesson. Why are you implementing a stop?" "Routine security check, Collins. Protocol requires periodic assessment of our route security." Morrison kept his voice steady, professional, giving no indication of his true concerns. He needed to maintain the element of surprise if he was going to protect Charlotte effectively. As the lead vehicle pulled into a small car park beside a quiet street, Morrison observed the black SUV's reaction. Instead of continuing past or finding their own parking area, the vehicle stopped approximately 50 meters away, positioning itself with a clear view of the royal convoy. This behavior eliminated any remaining doubt in Morrison's mind. They were dealing with a coordinated surveillance operation. Morrison exited his vehicle and approached Charlotte's car with deliberate calm, his trained eyes taking in every detail of the situation. Through the rear window, he could see Charlotte pressed against the glass, her young face pale with fear. Detective Inspector Collins was turned away from the princess, engaged in what appeared to be an urgent phone conversation. As Morrison reached Charlotte's door, he made eye contact with the 8-year-old princess. Her relief at seeing him was immediately apparent, and she again mouthed the words "help me" while pointing discreetly toward Collins. The gesture was clear and unmistakable. Charlotte feared the very person assigned to protect her. Morrison tapped on the window, and Collins looked up, her expression showing irritation at the interruption. She ended her phone call and lowered the window. "Sergeant Morrison, what's the nature of this stop? We're running behind schedule." "Inspector Collins, I need to conduct a security assessment with Princess Charlotte. Standard protocol requires direct communication with our principal during route modifications." Morrison's voice carried the authority of his rank and experience. Collins' hesitation was telling. "That's highly irregular, Morrison. The princess is secure, and we should continue to our destination. Any delays could compromise our schedule and create security risks." Morrison stepped closer to the vehicle, his presence commanding. "Inspector, I'm implementing emergency assessment protocol. Please step out of the vehicle so I can speak with Princess Charlotte directly." The tension in the air was palpable as Collins realized she had little choice but to comply. As she exited the vehicle, Morrison quickly moved to take her place beside Charlotte. The moment the door closed, the young princess grabbed Morrison's arm with both hands. "Sergeant Morrison, she's not who she says she is," Charlotte whispered urgently, her voice trembling with fear. "She's been asking me strange questions about Papa and Mama's schedule, and she keeps talking to someone on her phone about where we're going. She said if I told anyone, something bad would happen to my family." Morrison's blood ran cold. The implications of Charlotte's words were staggering. If Collins was indeed an imposter or had been compromised, it meant the entire security detail had been infiltrated. The princess's safety was in immediate jeopardy, and Morrison was possibly the only person in a position to protect her. "Princess, I need you to stay very calm and do exactly as I say," Morrison whispered back. "Can you tell me what she asked about your parents?" Charlotte's voice was barely audible. "She wanted to know when Papa would be alone in his office, and she asked about Mama's appointment this afternoon. She also asked if I knew about the secret room where they keep important papers. I told her I didn't know, but she kept asking." Morrison's mind raced. The questions Charlotte described were clearly intelligence gathering, likely for a kidnapping or worse. The secret room reference suggested knowledge of the royal family's security arrangements that should not have been available to an outsider. Through the window, Morrison could see Collins pacing nearby, her phone pressed to her ear once again. The black SUV had moved closer, and Morrison counted at least 4 occupants now visible. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Morrison activated his personal emergency beacon, a device that would immediately alert Commander Hughes and request immediate backup. He then made a decision that would either save Charlotte's life or mark the end of his career. "Princess, we're going to get out of this car right now, and we're going to walk to my vehicle. I want you to stay very close to me and do exactly as I say. Can you do that?" Charlotte nodded bravely, her trust in Morrison absolute. As they prepared to move, Morrison noticed that Collins had ended her phone call and was approaching the vehicle with determined strides. Her hand rested on something beneath her jacket, and Morrison's trained eye recognized the gesture of someone preparing to draw a weapon. Morrison opened the car door and stepped out with Charlotte, immediately positioning himself between the princess and Collins. "Inspector, we're returning to the lead vehicle to continue our security assessment." Collins' facade finally dropped. "That won't be necessary, Morrison. Princess Charlotte will be coming with us now." Her voice had changed, losing any pretense of deference or protocol. It was the voice of someone accustomed to giving orders and expecting obedience. "I'm afraid that's not possible," Morrison replied, his hand moving to his radio. "Princess Charlotte remains under my protection." Collins' response was swift and decisive. She drew her weapon, pointing it directly at Morrison while maintaining enough distance to avoid being disarmed easily. "Morrison, you're interfering with an authorized operation. Step away from the princess immediately."
Morrison's training kicked in.
He immediately pushed Charlotte behind him while assessing his options. The black SUV was now moving toward them, and Morrison could see armed figures preparing to exit the vehicle. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but his primary objective remained clear: protect Princess Charlotte at all costs. "Charlotte, run to the shop across the street and call for help," Morrison commanded without taking his eyes off Collins.
"Go now."
But before Charlotte could move, the situation escalated dramatically. The black SUV screeched to a halt nearby, and four armed men emerged, moving with military precision toward Morrison and the princess. Morrison realized that this was a coordinated kidnapping attempt that had been in planning for some time. Morrison's options were limited but clear. He could surrender and hope for the best, or he could fight and create enough chaos to give Charlotte a chance to escape. There was no question about his choice. In one fluid motion, Morrison dove toward Collins while shouting for Charlotte to run. His years of combat training served him well as he managed to knock Collins' weapon aside before it could be fired. The two officers struggled on the ground as the armed men from the SUV rushed toward the scene. Charlotte, showing remarkable courage for an 8-year-old, ran toward a nearby shop where several concerned citizens had noticed the commotion. Her screams for help pierced the air, drawing immediate attention from passers-by who began calling emergency services. Morrison managed to pin Collins to the ground and retrieve her weapon, but he knew his advantage would be short-lived. The four men from the SUV were professional and well-armed, and Morrison was in an impossible tactical situation. However, his primary objective had been achieved. Charlotte was away from immediate danger and help was on the way.
"Armed police! Drop your weapons!"
The shout came from behind the approaching men, and Morrison felt a surge of relief as he saw Commander Hughes and a tactical response team emerging from unmarked vehicles. The cavalry had arrived just in time. The next few minutes were a blur of activity as the tactical team moved to secure the scene. 3 of the 4 men from the SUV were taken into custody after a brief standoff, while the 4th managed to escape in the confusion. Collins, revealed to be an imposter named Sarah Mitchell with connections to an international criminal organization, was arrested on charges of impersonating a police officer, conspiracy to kidnap, and terrorism. As the immediate danger passed, Morrison's attention returned to Charlotte. The brave young princess was surrounded by concerned citizens and emergency personnel, but she was physically unharmed. When she saw Morrison approaching, she broke free from the protective circle and ran to him.
"Sergeant Morrison, you saved me!"
Charlotte exclaimed, throwing her arms around the man who had risked everything to protect her. Morrison knelt down to Charlotte's level, his voice gentle despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system.
"You were very brave, princess. You did exactly the right thing by letting me know you were scared."
Commander Hughes approached, his expression serious but relieved. "Morrison, preliminary investigation confirms that Detective Inspector Collins was indeed an imposter.
The real Sarah Collins was found bound and unconscious in her apartment this morning. It appears this operation was planned with considerable detail and inside knowledge. The implications were staggering.
Someone with access to royal security protocols had planned this kidnapping attempt, providing the criminals with enough information to replace a key member of Charlotte's protection detail. The fact that Morrison had detected the deception and acted on his instincts had prevented what could have been a catastrophic breach of royal security. As emergency services worked to secure the scene and begin their investigation, Morrison reflected on the choices that had led to this moment. His decision to trust Charlotte's silent plea for help had been vindicated, but the larger questions remained.
Who had provided the inside information? How extensive was the conspiracy? And, most importantly, was the royal family truly safe?
The answers to these questions would emerge in the coming days, but, for now, Morrison was content with the knowledge that Princess Charlotte was safe. The 8-year-old girl who had shown such courage in the face of danger was already asking when she could resume her normal activities, demonstrating the resilience that had become a hallmark of the British royal family. As they prepared to transport Charlotte back to Kensington Palace under heavily increased security, Morrison realized that this incident would fundamentally change royal protection protocols. The fact that the security system had been compromised from within meant that every procedure would need to be reviewed and strengthened.
The young princess looked up at Morrison one final time before entering the secure vehicle.
"Will you still be my protection officer?" she asked with the directness that only a child could manage. Morrison smiled, despite the gravity of the situation.
"As long as you need me, princess. As long as you need me."
The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Kensington Palace as Sergeant James Morrison adjusted his ceremonial uniform for what he believed would be another routine day of royal protection duty. At 34, Morrison had served in the Royal Protection Unit for 8 years, earning respect for his unwavering dedication and sharp instincts. His colleagues often joked that he could spot trouble from a mile away, but nothing could have prepared him for what would unfold on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday in October. Morrison had been assigned to Princess Charlotte's security detail for the past 6 months. The young princess, now 8 years old, had captured the hearts of the British public with her spirited personality and infectious smile.
Unlike her more reserved older brother Prince George, Charlotte possessed a natural charisma that reminded many of her late grandmother, Princess Diana.
She was curious about everything, asked endless questions, and had an uncanny ability to remember the names and personal details of every staff member she encountered. The morning briefing had been standard. Charlotte would be attending a private art lesson at a nearby studio, followed by lunch with her maternal grandmother, Carol Middleton. The route had been planned meticulously, with multiple security checkpoints and backup protocols in place. Morrison's role was to remain in the lead vehicle, maintaining constant communication with the princess's car and monitoring for any potential threats. As the motorcade prepared to depart, Morrison noticed Charlotte's unusual behavior. Typically, the princess would wave enthusiastically at the palace staff gathered to see her off, her face bright with anticipation for the day's activities. Today, however, she appeared subdued, almost withdrawn.
Her normally sparkling eyes seemed clouded with an emotion Morrison couldn't quite identify.
When their eyes met through the bulletproof glass of her vehicle, he saw something that made his trained instincts sharpen: fear.
The first indication that something was amiss came 15 minutes into the journey.
Morrison's earpiece crackled with a message from Detective Inspector Sarah Collins, who was seated beside Charlotte in the rear vehicle. "Base, this is Collins. Princess Charlotte appears distressed. She's been unusually quiet and keeps looking toward the windows as if searching for something."
Morrison immediately switched to the secure channel. "Collins, can you determine the source of her distress? Any indication of physical discomfort or external concerns?" "Negative on physical discomfort. She's alert but anxious. I've attempted conversation, but she's giving only minimal responses. This is highly unusual behavior for her." The motorcade continued through the familiar streets of London, past the carefully screened crowds that had gathered hoping for a glimpse of the young royal. Morrison's eyes constantly scanned the surroundings, looking for anything out of place. His years of training had taught him that threats often came from unexpected directions, and Charlotte's behavior was setting off every alarm bell in his experienced mind. 20 minutes into the journey, as they approached a quieter residential area, Morrison noticed a black SUV that had been following their route for several blocks. The vehicle maintained a consistent distance, neither attempting to overtake nor falling significantly behind. While this could have been coincidental, Morrison's instincts told him otherwise. He immediately radioed the information to the command center and requested a background check on the vehicle's registration. "Base, this is Morrison. Black SUV, license plate November 74 Charlie Delta Fox, has been maintaining consistent distance behind our convoy for the past 8 minutes. Requesting immediate background verification and possible intercept if necessary." The response came quickly. "Morrison, vehicle registration shows it belongs to a private security company. We're attempting to verify their client and purpose in your vicinity. Continue with planned route but maintain heightened awareness." As they approached a traffic light, Morrison made a decision that would prove crucial. Instead of following the predetermined route, he instructed the driver to take an alternate path that would test whether the SUV was deliberately following them. "Take the next left onto Pembroke Road, then circle back through the residential area. I want to see if our shadow maintains pursuit."
The maneuver was executed smoothly, and Morrison watched with growing concern as the black SUV also deviated from the main road, continuing to follow their altered route. This was no coincidence. Someone was deliberately tracking the princess's movements, and Morrison's primary concern shifted from routine protection to active threat assessment. It was then that he saw it, the moment that would haunt him for months to come. As their vehicle slowed at another intersection, Morrison turned to check on Charlotte through the rear window of her car. The princess was pressed against the glass, her small hand flat against the surface, and her lips were moving in a deliberate, unmistakable pattern. Even from his position in the lead vehicle, Morrison could read the words she was silently forming, "Help me." The sight sent ice through Morrison's veins. Princess Charlotte was not just distressed, she was genuinely frightened and actively seeking assistance. But, help from what? Or whom? Morrison's mind raced through the possibilities. Was there a threat inside her vehicle? Had someone compromised her security detail? Was the following SUV part of a coordinated kidnapping attempt? Morrison immediately activated the emergency protocol channel. Code red, code red. This is Morrison. I have visual confirmation that Princess Charlotte is in distress and requesting assistance. All units, implement immediate protective measures. We may have a compromised situation. The response was swift and professional. Morrison, confirmed code red received. What is the nature of the threat? Do you have visual on any immediate dangers? Negative on immediate visible threats, but the princess is clearly frightened and has communicated distress. We also have a persistent tail vehicle. Requesting immediate backup and preparation for emergency extraction if necessary. As the motorcade continued, Morrison noticed that Detective Inspector Collins was engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with someone on her mobile phone. This struck him as highly irregular, as protocol dictated that all communications during transport should go through official channels. Moreover, Charlotte's distress seemed to intensify whenever Collins spoke on the phone. Morrison made another critical observation. Each time Collins ended a phone conversation, the black SUV would adjust its position, sometimes moving closer or changing lanes in a way that suggested coordinated communication. The pieces of a disturbing puzzle were beginning to form in Morrison's mind. His years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, even when they conflicted with official protocols or challenged the trustworthiness of colleagues. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Charlotte's fear, Collins' unusual communication patterns, and the persistent surveillance by an unidentified vehicle all pointed to a serious compromise of the princess's security. Morrison faced an agonizing decision. Protocol demanded that he follow established procedures and maintain faith in his fellow officers. However, his primary duty was to protect Princess Charlotte, and every instinct screamed that she was in immediate danger. The young girl's silent plea for help had been unmistakable, and Morrison knew that any delay in response could have catastrophic consequences. He made his choice with the clarity that comes only in moments of absolute moral certainty. Switching to a secure personal communication device that bypassed the standard security channels, Morrison contacted his superior, Commander William Hughes, directly. "Commander, this is Morrison on secure personal line. I have reason to believe Princess Charlotte's security has been compromised. I'm seeing indicators that suggest coordination between her escort vehicle and an unknown surveillance unit." Commander Hughes' response was immediate and grave. "Morrison, that's an extremely serious allegation. What specific evidence do you have?" "Sir, the princess has displayed clear signs of distress and has communicated a request for help. Detective Inspector Collins has been conducting unauthorized communications that appear to coordinate with movements of a following vehicle. I believe we may have an insider threat situation." There was a brief pause before Hughes responded. "Morrison, I'm authorizing you to implement emergency protective measures at your discretion. Priority 1 is the safety of Princess Charlotte. I'm dispatching additional units to your location immediately. Document everything and trust your judgment." With official backing secured, Morrison prepared to take action that would either save a young princess's life or end his career in disgrace. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders as he realized that the next few minutes would determine not just Charlotte's safety, but, potentially, the future of the British royal family. As the motorcade approached another intersection, Morrison made his decision. He would stop the convoy and personally assess Charlotte's condition, regardless of protocol or the potential consequences. The young princess had asked for help, and Sergeant James Morrison was determined to provide it, even if it meant challenging the very system he had sworn to serve. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything Morrison believed about duty, loyalty, and the courage required to do what was right when the stakes couldn't be higher. In his earpiece, he could hear Colin's voice growing more agitated as she apparently realized that their route was being altered. The black SUV had moved closer, and Morrison could see at least 3 occupants inside, their attention focused intently on the royal vehicle. Time was running out, and Morrison knew that whatever was planned would likely happen soon. Princess Charlotte's life depended on his next actions, and failure was simply not an option.